Like one of the things I chose to do was look at, all the developmental stages, like birth to three to, and understand what happened to me, like really look at it, and what was the belief system that got imprinted because of trauma X and trauma Y, and how that then related to decisions I made in my young life, my choice of my husband, my first husband, all of that was a reflection of the point of view of the wounded parts of me.
Hi, everyone. Let's start healing. I'm Adrienne Murchison, and welcome to episode 165 of the Let's Start Healing podcast. We have more in common than we think, and what we have in common can change the world. Well, I bet either you or someone you love, certainly someone you know, has had a medical issue that God really brought them through. And that's the case of my guest today. She is a spiritual teacher, Regan Caruthers. She is in the state of Missouri, and she had and will share a circumstance where she had a medical issue, and the voice of God guided her before she even knew that there was a problem, that there was a medical problem. But she talks about this and more, about her relationship with God, her spiritual gifts that she has had since childhood. She also shares some experiences that she's had with dark energies and how she was able to manage those experiences. And I know that some people do not like to talk or hear about such things. So I will put in the description the minute mark where that comes up. But she is a very, very wise woman, very intuitive woman. As I said, a spiritual teacher. She has a yoga center at her home and property in Missouri. And I'm just looking forward to you getting to know her. Please like this episode, subscribe on whatever platform you are listening on. Share Let's Start Healing with at least one person that you know. Let's meet Regan. Let's get started and let's start healing. Welcome, Regan.
Oh, it's so good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I've been looking forward to talking with you, and your background is so interesting and fascinating, and your story. How are you today?
I'm good. I had a nasty cold. There's so many bugs going around. And
True.
I ended up feeling much better in just a couple of days. But then right at bedtime, I would get congested. Like I wouldn't be congested all day and
Yeah,
feel fine. And then literally at like 9:30, I would get all stuffed up.
I've been
So
through
I
that.
haven't slept well, in, I don't know, 5 days, but
Oh,
I just keep going to my heart and connecting to love, and yeah, it's getting
yeah.
me through.
I'm so glad. Well, I hope you feel better soon.
Thanks. I'm like
Absolutely.
95% there.
Now, I know you just told me that you're in Missouri. Where were
I
you? Are you a native of Missouri, or where are you from?
Yeah, I was born in St. Louis, and I spent the first 30 years of my life there.
Okay.
And then when I had the opportunity to work at the Heart Math Institute, um, in the late 90s, I moved to Santa Cruz, California, and I was
Okay.
there, up until just a few years ago.
Wow.
Um, yeah.
Well, okay. I want to discuss all of that. And you you have a yoga center
I
there
do,
in
I
St.
do,
Louis.
on my property. So I have 10 acres
Oh,
here in Washington, Missouri, which is about an hour west of St. Louis, and I have a 10-acre estate and converted this, like, 3,000 square foot building, which used to house tractors and was a bit of a man cave for the
oh.
owner, into my yoga center. Yeah, yeah, so,
Wow.
there's no tractors in here anymore, or And there's not a disco ball like there used to be. And
That must be amazing.
yeah, it is pretty amazing. I mean, it's a short commute. I just walk down my driveway.
I
So
have a close friend who's a Thai yoga massage practitioner, and that is something that she has wanted, is to own property and then, have her clients come there, give classes, courses, just
yeah,
beautiful. Yeah.
well, I hope she finds a way because it's a beautiful life, and it wasn't always. So I'm so grateful for what I've been able to finally create.
So you have then we can go in whatever order you think is best in terms of your story. I'm thinking about how you have a corporate background. You worked in Silicon Valley and then you left that. And I know there's a whole story to how you grew up and your spirituality. And so we can't really go synchronistically, but maybe we can. I want people to know about you. And well, first, let me start here. It seems to me that you've always been deeply connected
Hmm.
to your spirituality and had a heightened awareness of God and the divine. Is that right?
Yeah, except I took a break from age 9 to 27. I at the age of 9, I consciously, literally screamed out loud uh, for it all to stop. I was highly psychic, still am, definitely connected to divine presence, and it was just more than I could manage or make sense of.
Mm-hmm.
So I screamed for it to all stop, and it did. And
Mm-hmm.
then, literally in my suite at a national sales meeting for a global publisher, in the middle of the night, an entity, and I know this might sound strange for your
Mm-hmm.
listeners, but the God honest truth, an entity that used to, for lack of a better word, just harass me when I was a little kid, like this.
A
I don't know.
spiritual entity.
Yeah, he kind of looked, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I mean, sometimes he would look sort of, he was always a man, but sometimes he would take on, I don't know, this just like really dark presence. Not always, but that was who I saw that final time at age 9 when I screamed out loud for it all to stop. It was in response to a visitation from this entity. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so fast forward, I'm in my suite in a national sales meeting in San Francisco, and in the middle of the night, in the middle of my sleep, I awaken and I haven't yet opened my eyes, but I know someone's in my room. I can feel it.
Mm.
And I open my eyes, and literally at the end of my bed is this same entity. And I just looked at him and I said, "Oh, it's you. It's only you. I'm not afraid of you." And I went back to sleep. And when I woke up the next morning, all I could feel was unconditional love and oneness in God. And that lasted for about 3 years. So I kid, like maybe that entity was trying to get me to feel completely that whole time when I was little. I don't know.
Mhm.
But something about confronting that, right? Something that used to terrorize me and fill me with terror, and to meet it with sovereignty and
Yeah.
not fear,
Mhm.
was the condition, right, to fully awaken me
Mm.
to what I, now understand. And it doesn't mean that I'm able to sustain that awareness all the time. I mean,
Mhm.
I'm not Jesus by any stretch of the imagination. But it is a reference point. It's something that I can return to.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, everything changed after that.
And so, I'm thinking 5 things I wanna ask you, but I'm gonna ask you, like, later in the conversation. When you felt this, unconditional love and oneness, can you describe that? And I'm asking that for a reason because of another friend had told me about an experience, which I'll mention in a moment.
Yeah. What I will say is that words are inadequate
Mhm.
to describe what that feels like. What I can say more concretely is, I grew up with a lot of childhood trauma. I had a mentally ill mother and an abusive stepfather. And upon awakening, all I could feel, particularly for my stepdad, was nothing but love. I had absolute complete insight into
Mhm.
the conditioning of him, right? What
Yeah.
he experienced that created what he had become. And I had
Mhm.
nothing but the most infinite
Yeah.
compassion and love.
Mhm.
And I felt no separation between me and a homeless person on the street because I was in San Francisco. You'd walk to dinner after my awakening, and I just felt nothing but like I was one with that man on the street, or one with a colleague who had thought to do me harm,
Yeah.
24 hours ago. It just, yeah. And I frankly think that's what Jesus was trying to teach us,
Mhm.
right? To embody that quality of divine love. And
Right.
for whatever reason, I was just graced. Um, and I'll never know exactly why I was graced with knowing what that feels like.
Mhm. And as you said that before the age of 9 was the last time before 27, but prior to the age of 9, you would get this visitation.
Oh, yeah, I would see things and I could hear people's thoughts, like nobody, you don't
Mhm.
want to do that. Like, know what's in there. So there was a lot of sensory um, information, right? There was a lot of information coming at me, and I was
Yeah.
just a little girl,
Yeah.
right? And while my mother, even though she suffered, she was incredible. She was brilliant. She was highly clairvoyant. The things that she manifested and experienced in her young life, which you can read about in my book. Anyway, she used to kid that, when she would talk about that, people thought she was a pathological liar. I mean, she dated a king. Anyway, um, so I did have her, like, she didn't ever make me feel wrong or
Yeah.
bad about what I sensed. And I could,
Mhm.
I didn't really talk to her a lot about it,
Mhm.
but I didn't feel like there was something wrong with me per se. All I knew, it was more than I could make sense of.
Yeah.
And I just preferred to, like, just bring down the veil.
Right, right. I mean, it's understandable as a child. I mean, on a very much more minimal level for me, I had as a young child, as a teenager, I had just this intuition that was really confusing, and it would make me uncomfortable because I didn't know what it meant. And I did put that on hold for maybe 5 years. I just put it on the back burner, and then I after 5 years, that was in my 20s, brought it back in. But it's confusing. I can only imagine that something to that degree at 9 years old. And
Well, yeah, and I went to a school, so I started learning meditation at the age of 3. My grade school was founded by these women who were remarkable in their own way. They all had advanced degrees. They were
Mhm.
deeply spiritual and deeply connected. I was also learning Latin and reading Shakespeare and learning algebra.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a mystery school, but that also, created, I think, this opening
Mhm.
for me, just based on how I'm designed, because it wasn't true for all my classmates, right? They
Right,
weren't having the
right.
same they weren't having the same experience I was. But I think that also created more of this open container for
Yeah.
all of this to come in. And frankly, it's not all great. Like
Mhm.
those that are enculturated to believe it's all light and love, and well, it's just not true. There's a lot
Mhm.
of other stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I just felt at the time at 9, after, that visitation, that it just needed to stop.
And so why do you think it stopped so it comes back at 27, and did you want it to continue the oneness and love that you felt, unconditional love for 3 years. Did you want that to continue, or it just dissipated, or what happened?
Well, I think what I would say, and this is a key theme in my memoir, is that it takes discipline to sustain that, right? I was graced with it. But in order for me to stay at that vibration, right, at that kind of consciousness, uh, it requires a disciplined practice, which at the
Yeah.
time I didn't have. I mean,
Mhm.
I did, I worked at heart math. I taught heart math. I practiced heart math. I, had a spiritual life, but it was more still powered from grace
Yeah.
than my own effort.
What a wonderful distinction. And
Yeah.
I mentioned I had a friend. I was attending a spiritual discussion group for many years, and one of the members was saying that he experienced for some long period of time a feeling of oneness and connection to everything.
Mhm.
And it was just incredible. And when we met him, that time had passed, and he was feeling sad about that experience, that experience had left him.
Mhm.
I don't know that he ever figured out why, but that's a great distinction that you just made. What is your memoir?
Oh, it's called Tragic Magic. I just published it in November.
Wonderful.
Available on
Congratulations.
Thanks. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. And yeah, I mean, I was responding really to a divine directive to write it. And what I hope, I mean, the intention in sharing my story is ideally to inspire someone else
Yeah.
to do the work. There's,
Yes.
for me, what I finally, got to in my 40s was to become disciplined in my practice.
Mhm.
And discipline means you do it when you don't want to. you know, when
Yes.
when there's 1,000 other things, including sweeping the floor,
Yes. Yes.
that you could do instead. And it was also in returning to the wisdom teachings of my youth and
Mhm.
um, really integrating and incorporating so much and utilizing all that I had learned to go back inside to truly heal. Because what I had really done was just kind of leapfrog over a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
and what I needed to actually do was to travel back and bring that heightened awareness. And so my book is, sharing, how I came finally to do that. And all the mess, right? Just the
Yeah.
all the mess that was basically me just still acting from my traumatized self, right? It
Yeah.
was that unhealed part of me that was running my show through most of my adult life. I mean, even after my awakening.
Mhm.
Um, so I'm hoping in just my vulnerable, raw share of it all
Yeah.
that people see themselves a
Mhm.
little bit in what I've shared. I mean, it's not gonna be a precise, exact mirror, but that
Mhm.
they see themselves and it inspires them to
Mhm.
sit and tend. Like one of the things I chose to do was look at, all the developmental stages, like birth to 3, 3 to, and understand what happened to me, like really look at it and what was the belief system that got imprinted because of trauma X and trauma Y, and how that then related to decisions I made in my young life, my choice of my husband, my first husband, all of that was a reflection of the point of view of the wounded parts of me, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I can relate to that. I wasn't uh I mean, I've talked about this before. I did experience growing up sexual abuse, And that definitely impacted my self-esteem. And that is something that I mean, I am so far, I have grown so much in my self-worth, but it's definitely something that I have to stay on top of and tend to. Just like
Yeah.
you're
I mean,
saying.
that's what I hope your listeners understand is we're never done.
Yeah. Mhm.
You don't get a certificate, you don't graduate. And in fact, what happens, and I think this is what I'm hearing you say, is you return back
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
you bring with you new awareness, new tools, new maturity, new insights, but you bring it back to
Yes.
that trauma.
Yes, and you know what? I mean, really not that long ago within the last week, I have had conversations with God about, I want to just be done with this. I want to lay this down as far as that component, of feeling unworthy at different points in time, because I know that that can hold me back. And I but it's like, I just wanna be done. Like, help me. I just I know the only way that I can conquer that 1,000% is to stay in communication. That's the work for me, staying in communication and listening and, my own spiritual practices with God.
Well, yeah, and to bring loving witness to that part of you. So bring the love
Yeah.
of God to
Mhm.
that little girl when she was sexually abused and sit with her, right? That's
Yeah.
what I did. That was my process
Yeah.
as I sat with myself. And I
Mhm.
didn't want to change her mind because her point of view, your point of view is valid. There's a certain validity to it. So we don't want to make these wounded parts of ourselves wrong. But instead, what I found is I just wanted to sit and say, I love you. I am so sorry.
Mhm.
I'm here. I'm not going to abandon you like I used to. I'm right here. Tell me everything. I can take it.
Mhm.
Right. And I'm just going to send back, radiate back to you all of the love that and I'm going to bring the love of God with me
Yes.
and just hold witness, loving
Mhm.
witness to this little girl who at 18 months old was making her own sandwich.
Mm. Mm.
Um, so yeah,
Was your mom, well, you just mentioned, that 18 months old, you're making your own sandwich. Was your mom a single mom at that time?
yeah, she was. Was.
She was.
Um, Thankfully, she soon, because I think she knew she needed help. I had care in my home. It's like something right out of the movie The Help. My anime. She had like a white coat. Everything. Anyway, I stayed in touch with her until she was in her 90s. I mean, she
Wow.
was such an integral part of my young life. And my mother, I would say in my young life, 90% of the time was nothing but magic and the most profound love I've ever known.
Mhm.
But there were times, like that time where for whatever reason she couldn't get out of bed, and she finds me on the kitchen floor making a mayonnaise sandwich. I don't even know how I got out of my crib, how I opened the fridge, how I found a knife. I mean, all of that's kind of a miracle. And she was like, "Oh, honey, you were always so competent." And I'm like, "Mom, that's so tragic. I was competent because I had to be. It
Mhm.
was a trauma response." I mean, I share in my book, my first sentence that I articulated as a toddler was, "I want to do it all by myself." I'd
Mm.
already decided that that was the way it needed to be.
What did that mean as a toddler? Like, it's easier if I just do it by myself?
Well, I think what I was saying, though not conscious of it, was that I couldn't rely on anyone. There was not safety. I had an absent father who, in many ways, did care for me. I mean, certainly he did financially, and I saw him, on a regular basis, but he wasn't there, and he
Yeah.
knew my mom was unwell. you know, and then my mother, bless her heart, is in the mental hospital, and that's where she finds her next husband, you know, and so when I was a teenager and things were just like so chaotic, I'm like, well, mom, what did you expect? That's not where you find your person, ideally. Yeah. So anyway, but it was all, I mean, even the other night, when I was all stuffed up and there was, you know, some things going on with my kids that I won't, you know, belabor. But anyway, my affirmation, my prayer was just feeling the gratitude for who I am now,
Mm-hmm.
for, you know, all that I went through, all the ways that I failed, and then all the ways that I found my way back
Yeah.
uh, to myself, to my spiritual practice, to my conscious relationship with God. Um, yeah, because who I am now, I love so much, and I'm so proud of her.
Mm-hmm.
She's remarkable. And so all of that was whatever, for whatever reason, were all the raw ingredients that I needed to become who I now am.
Right. Right. Right.
So,
And when you were in, I want to sit with what you just said for a second before I ask the next question, because I I've heard people say before, to be grateful, not to be grateful, but they've been grateful for tragic things that happened to them. And that was something that, I can't say that, I can't say I'm grateful that this happened to me. But I do know that it definitely feeds into who I am in terms of I'm an empathetic person
mhm.
to an extreme degree, maybe too much, but just my whole makeup, my whole consciousness, I feel like that woke me up in a way because I don't know, it was almost like an out of body experience when it would happen.
Well,
So,
it was. I mean, your spirit, that's, you know, in the indigenous ways, when
mm,
they're healing someone, it's
yeah.
called soul retrieval, right? Because parts of us do depart
Mhm.
because we don't want to be present with
Yeah.
what's happening. What I was sharing this with my younger son the other night. We were talking about some really, you know, pretty dark stuff that had happened, and I said, you know, as a light worker, as a spiritual teacher, the fact that I have suffered the way that I have makes me the teacher, right? Like how could I effectively,
Mhm.
authentically, really tend and support someone in the absence of really understanding the magnitude of what I've known, right? That enables me, like to your point, to have empathy, to be relatable, right? There's
Mhm.
nothing worse than a spiritual teacher who acts like they don't have anything to work
Right.
on, or you know, and there's plenty of those, right, out in the public sphere, who act as if, you know, every day is unicorns and rainbows,
Mhm.
and that's just false. There's just an inherent falseness in that.
Mhm.
So for me, in being a teacher, right, and in trying to be of service in the ways that I am, um, all of that has made me, I think, an effective teacher.
Yeah. And when you were in the corporate world, did you burn out of the corporate world, or it was just time to leave because you had been there for 30 years or
Uh, well, I re-entered the corporate world at a time when that wasn't what I wanted. There was some pretty significant personal finance stuff in my first marriage, and we were literally, I was working at Heart Math. My husband had sold his businesses, and we moved out to California, and he was going to care for our son for a year while I was working at Heart Math for basically no wage. I mean, it was almost like being a renunciate. I wasn't making any money. And we were living in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is, one of the most expensive places to live, period. Anyway, so we were running out of money, and my husband at the time had really no plan. And then the plan that he did have was going to take years, right, to rebuild. So that meant I had to go back to work. And I had an infant. I mean, it broke my heart. But that's what I did. I didn't really have a choice, or I didn't feel at the time that I had a choice. And so I went back into the work that I had known, which initially was academic publishing, but because of the internet was becoming more educational technology and all the innovation that was happening. So I re-entered that world, and that was the world I, stayed in from the age of 31 until my mid 40s. And it was because of my second husband and his commitment to me and the resources that he had, where he, one fateful day when I was, an executive with a startup in San Francisco, and I was driving literally 3.5 hours a day back and forth to work as a single mother. I mean, it was really, really hard. And he just looked at me one night because we were dating, and he said, "Why don't you just let me take care of you?" I mean, to me, I was like, I recoiled at that. Like I pushed it away, and initially, because I mean, that just, no one had ever said that to me, ever. I had relied only, frankly, mostly, I'd say 99% of my time on myself. And I said to him finally, after not recoiling and realizing it was my wounded self reacting that way, and I said, "Sweetie, I love you, and I'm going to have to really think about that." And so I did. I thought about it for about 3 months. And then I knew in saying yes what that meant, right? That was a commitment.
Right.
And I did, and it was the best decision I'd ever made. So.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And you mentioned in one of your emails to me that you had heart surgery. And at what point did that happen, and what impact did that have on you spiritually and emotionally?
This is such a miraculous story. So I do want to share it from the beginning because it's important. So this was December of 2021. In California, we were still locked down because of COVID. In my little town here in Missouri, they were locked down for like a week and a half.
Really?
They weren't any sicker, So anyway, I mean, that's a whole other podcast. But anyway, I had traveled to Joshua Tree to work on my book, and to just get
town, or where is that a town?
Joshua Tree is outside of Palm Springs. It's a national park, known for really potent energy and energy vortexes. Anyway, it's just a beautiful place. And so that's where I chose to go to work on my book, Tragic Magic, and to just get away from the house, because we didn't have a COVID house. My husband was like doing Zooms all day long in the living room. I mean, it was really hard. So anyway, I got out of town to renew. And, by that time, I had this disciplined practice.
Yeah.
And so
before you go on, I want you to talk into the microphone, because when you do this, I don't know.
I know it's as if I'm Italian, but I'm not. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so I began every time I would write with prayer, and I would ask for the highest good and for my guides and for God to guide my writing. And then I would just sit in the quiet and just be receptive, right? So on this fateful night, as I sat, divine guidance says, quite urgently, says, "You must urgently move home." I lived on Monterey Bay. I had a beautiful home on the ocean. Like no one in their right mind, right? My parents were both dead, and I'm an only child, right? There was nothing really to come back to. But I knew the voice, right? I knew that that was the voice of my highest good. And I had learned to be obedient to it. So I literally come out of meditation. I check my phone to see if I have enough bars to make a phone call because I'm in the high desert, and I do. And I call a friend in St. Louis who's a realtor. And I said, God says I have to urgently move home. And I do what I'm told. So I literally flew out of Palm Springs that next morning and flew to St. Louis. And I asked her, I said, will you help me find where God wants me to be? And she said, well, of course. And my husband responded with unconditional love and acceptance. He's like, I don't care where we are. I just want to be with you. And so I found myself in just 3 months back in Missouri and got here, found, I mean, I won't belabor finding this magical property because it's in my book. But anyway, so I found my home, which isn't in St. Louis. God had said again in prayer and meditation, Franklin County, and I didn't even know what that meant. So anyway, did what I was told, found the home, was all moved in. And about 2 months after getting here, God says, you have to urgently go to the doctor. So it's like I was on a need to know basis with God, just like step 1, step 2. So I find a country doctor. I see him next day. And what do doctors do? They listen to your heart, right? That's the first thing they do. And he listens to my heart. He says, Regan, you have a really loud murmur. Something is wrong. I got to get you scheduled for an echocardiogram as quickly as possible. So that happens the following day. And that's when I learn I'm dying of a congenital heart defect. So I needed open heart surgery to replace my aortic valve. My aortic valve was born, it's called a bicuspid valve. It's a birth defect. And Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, where I was born, just happens to be one of the best places in the world for the surgery I needed, which is why God asked me to urgently move home. So Dr. Ralph Damiano, who's the head of cardiothoracic surgery at Barnes, saved my life. And on my day of discharge, which is just 4 days later, right? I have open heart surgery on a Friday morning, and I'm home on a Tuesday. It's amazing. But on my day of discharge, he came to see me, having already told my husband and my children this. And he said, Regan, there is no clinical explanation of how you were alive prior to this surgery. It was the worst aortic valve he'd ever seen. And typically in your aortic valve, you've got about $50 for blood to flow through the valve. In my case, it was the diameter a little less than a Q-tip stick. And I looked at him and I said, well, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I said, and I asked that from a very wide point of view. I'm not a traditional Christian. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's just not my
You're the only person I've heard say that other than myself.
And he said, yes, I do believe in Jesus Christ. I said, well, that's the only explanation I have. And I knew in that moment that my spiritual practice, this daily habit of bringing in the energy, the love of God into my heart and into my being, and my prayer to embody the consciousness of the Christ as best I can every day. That is my prayer, that is what kept me alive. And then to top it all off, I almost died of heart inflammation after surgery. I was sick for 6 months and in bed basically for 6 months. But I was hopeful because I was like, if I was supposed to be dead before, like, why would I die of heart inflammation, right? So I knew I was going to make it. And then as, I don't know, it sounds crazy, but on Palm Sunday, when I was all better, finally in December, the surgery was in July. I was better finally in December. I went to the funeral of a Christian mystic on Palm Sunday in April. And after that service, I returned to my room in Florida to go to the beach, and I see my chest, and I'm like, my scar looks different. And sure enough, it has changed shape, and I have a cross. I have a crucifix on my chest.
Amazing. And then what do you, I don't know if you can articulate this or not, but what do you look, you're here for a reason. Do you feel that you're still here for a reason? And what do you think that is?
Just to share what I know,
Mm-hmm.
to be an instrument of divine love, to
Yeah.
embody that as best I can. And some days are hard.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's a practice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yet it's so much more satisfying. The analogy being like when Adam and Eve were walking in the Garden of Eden and, bliss, there's no learning happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that
Mm-hmm.
state.
Yeah.
But boy, to depart from that state and to consciously try to return to that state,
Yeah.
that's where the richness is.
Yeah.
And that's what I try, in my own way to share with others, whether they're coming into my yoga center. I teach yoga as an act of service. I don't charge my community. So
Mm-hmm.
whether they're coming for that or inner life coaching, or they're reading my book, or they're just talking to me at the grocery store, um, yeah, I'm here to just be that agent of love for as long as God believes I should be here. And that's
Mm-hmm.
one thing, you hear the phrase, everybody dies when they're supposed to, or whatever. And I always thought, oh
Yeah.
God, how could that be true? Well, I think it's true, because I shouldn't have been here.
Wow.
There was no clinical, explanation.
Right. Right. And you seem so calm about it, but of course you've had all this time. But I mean, that's pretty incredible.
Well, yeah. And at the time, I will say, when I learned that I was dying and I learned that I needed this, I didn't have any fear.
Mm-hmm.
I have absolutely no fear of death. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
after my awakening, I was confronted with such demonic forces at night. I mean, I talk about this in the book. I mean, it was like something out of Star Wars. Remember when like Luke Skywalker was getting initiated into becoming a Jedi, and he
Mm-hmm.
was in that dark tunnel and confronting Darth Vader and all this other stuff. Well, that was what was happening to me in my own way. Uh, Gosh, for almost 2 years after my awakening at night. And it wasn't until I learned how to truly feel nothing but unconditional love and no fear when those forces were coming at me that they finally stopped visiting. And I learned how to exit my body. Again, I know this sounds nuts,
I've heard people
but I mean, I learned how to
say,
exit my body at will in
yeah,
that whole initiation process. And so when you experience that, you have no fear of death because you're not your body.
yeah, yes,
Um, so
yeah.
yeah, I don't
And
have any problem with my body dying. That's fine.
when you would experience these forces at night, would you be sleeping? I'm not asking. I'm not suggesting they were a dream. I'm just asking. Were you in a sleep state, or were you awake? Were you fully awake? And okay, yeah, yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, it
Hmm.
would happen just as I was like almost asleep, and I would hear first this like kind of rushing wind sound in my ears, like I was in like a wind tunnel. And then I would open my eyes, and there they all were.
Hmm.
And what happened to me initially is that they literally forced me out of my body, like they like took me out.
Hmm.
And it was like I was traveling some really dark
Yeah.
places, and I would have to really, I mean, all the will to get back into my body, and I would see my body like in the
Hmm.
bed,
Yeah.
right? Um, and so, yeah, I dealt with that, and then I learned, again, and there's no book. Anyway, it was all through direct experience, and then I learned how to exit my body at will and return, not being forced out by these forces, doing it, just at
Hmm.
will. I don't do that anymore because it's not recreational, right? It's like it's just to, I think, help you understand your
Mhm.
eternal nature.
Yeah. And so when you were exiting your body, at your own doing, were you feeling the spirit oneness of God and spirit
Oh,
form? Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
My
yeah.
gosh.
I know it's a lot.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like losing my train of thought. I'm so caught up in what in what you're sharing. And there are other people. I mean, I can think of a few people who have had not they definitely weren't as aware, or I don't even know if that's true what I'm saying, but the experiences were different. Your experiences are very full. But I have a friend about 30 some years ago used to tell me how she would be um, she would be lifted out of her building.
Mm.
She was, and they weren't God forces. She didn't describe them as God forces. And I stayed over her house. She was living here in Atlanta. I was living in New York at the time, and I stayed at her house overnight one night. And I honestly don't know. Usually, I know what's what. Especially in my sleep, I can discern what is going on. In this case, I didn't know. I felt something was going on with me, but I don't know if it was a dream or if it was something real. But I know I was glad when daytime came. I know I know that. And so what is heart math? I mean, I have been on the website, but if you could share
Oh,
what that is.
yeah. To me, heart math
Mhm.
is taking ancient wisdom and putting it in a model that the Western mind can really understand and accept. So, its essence is a body of research about the role that the heart plays in human performance, intelligence, and health, and really, just the power of the
Yeah.
heart, and then techniques to help you deepen your connection to your heart, to the wisdom of the heart, to utilize tools that they've developed for better emotional self-regulation.
Yeah.
Like, what do you do when you're triggered? Well, heart math is the answer to that. And
Mhm.
then, right around the time I was leaving, they were developing technology so that you can actually see in real time the impact that their techniques have on the rhythm of your heart.
Mhm.
Heart rate variability being, the greatest indicator of overall health of your physiology, and you want to see a lot of variability in your heart
Mhm.
rhythm. And when
Mhm.
we're feeling consciously love and gratitude, it looks like a sine wave.
Yeah.
So anyway, they've been, around since 91. They've got
Mhm.
4 peer-reviewed studies of the efficacy of what
Yeah.
they've developed, and it was a privilege to work there. I didn't work there long, for reasons, I describe in my book,
Mhm.
but what they've developed is, transformative and can change a lot. It can change your health, it can change your sense of well-being, uh, for sure.
Yeah. And what are some of your spiritual practices? On a daily basis, do they change from day to day? But share some of what your spiritual practices are.
Yeah, meditation and prayer and the physical practice of yoga.
Mhm.
And what I would say too throughout the day are little micro prayers, micro meditations, bringing myself
You said bringing
so
yourself into the present moment.
yeah, into the present moment.
Mhm.
We spend a lot of time in the past and in the future during the day. And so a
Mhm.
spiritual practice just of mindfulness, right? Being consciously aware of the present moment with no judgment is a
Mhm.
practice
Yeah.
that we engage in. Yeah, so just, sitting in the quiet and
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
heart-centered meditations and then praying. I pray every day. Sometimes I pray 100 times a day,
Mhm.
literally, praying for the highest good, asking my guides and ancestors of the highest vibration and intention, Yeshua, Jesus, and just asking for their help.
Yeah. And when you will you speak to do you feel that, our guides are with us all the time? Like we don't see them, with our eyes, but they're with us all the time or often enough.
Yeah, but it's kind of, I say this in the book, like Star Trek, the prime directive, like they won't intervene or
Yeah.
interfere
Yeah.
without your permission.
Mhm.
Um, so you need to have a practice where they know that they have your permission,
Yeah.
um, and that they can then, maybe be that voice in your heart that
Yeah.
tells you to move urgently back home or to urgently go to
Mhm.
the doctor.
Mhm.
Yeah, no, they're definitely there all the time. I mean, we're
Mhm.
we're here at Earth School to learn how to embody the love of God. There is literally no other reason we're here.
Yeah.
And so you're learning how to do that.
Yeah. I say, well, I study A Course in Miracles. Are you familiar with the
Oh,
course?
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I say what that book says, we're here to remember who we are and to, understand that we were created in love and only that, only
Right.
love. Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
Was there anything else that you wanted to share that I haven't asked you?
No, I
There's
mean,
so
people can
many.
follow me on Instagram at Regan Caruthers if they'd like. I try to
Yeah.
post videos often and just share, you know, there. And then ReganCaruthers.com is another place if folks are just looking for some support. If they want, to work with me in an inner life coaching, context, there's ways to do that. And then my book.
Well,
So,
share about your coaching and
oh, yeah,
describe it a little bit.
inner life coaching is to really help people develop their practice.
Your spiritual practice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and to become disciplined in that.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I serve not only to help you develop that because it's unique to you, right? But hold you accountable, with love,
Mhm.
but hold you accountable to it because
Mhm.
nothing changes until you do.
Right. Right. Well, one thing that I am asking guests, and I would love to ask you this, is how would you describe or define love? And the reason that I'm asking that is because a friend not long ago I realized was uncomfortable with the concept of love, and then when I realized that, I was like, this person isn't the only one. There's some people who are resistant to the idea of love, or it's not a highly valued word. And I, for me, God is love. God is love, And so I just wonder if you would share how you would describe love. Uh,
Yeah, it really, you can't. Words don't work
mhm,
for the love that I've known. But what I will say, if I had to describe qualities of it, there's no judgment. There is only this unconditional acceptance and feeling of no separation.
mhm,
It's the ego that thinks it's, separate and that there's things like right and wrong. Now, I'm not saying not to be that ethics don't matter. That's not what I'm saying. But it's
yeah,
just like Rumi said, like beyond ideas of right and wrongdoing, there's a field. I'll meet you there.
yeah,
Right. Because in that field, the world is too full
mhm,
to talk about.
yeah,
So that to me is what love is. And yeah, I can't really explain it. Energetically, what I can do, with people is they can feel it, right?
mhm,
Like they can feel that vibration coming out of me. And that helps them, I think, a little bit understand what it is.
I think we're about complete, and I've just really, really enjoyed this conversation, and just really thank you so much.
Me too. And it just feels like to me that we should have another one sometime.
Oh, I'd love that.
I think there's more to talk about.
Absolutely.
And if you ever find yourself in the middle of this country near St. Louis, I got a big house, lots of room. Come see me and hang out.
I will. I can tell. It must just be beautiful. It sounds like just so heartwarming and a dream.
Yeah, it's sweet. It's cold here today. It's like 15, so that's not fun. And my poor cat, that I brought from California is kind of like, why can't I go outside? What is your issue? But anyway, it's a sweet small town.
Wow.
So anyway, thank you again for having me as your guest. I'm grateful.
Thank you. I am so grateful. Thank you for joining us. You can find Let's Start Healing wherever you get your podcasts. Please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. Share Let's Start Healing with at least one person that you know. Until next time, let's start healing.